Well, it's KubeCon this week in Detroit. Lots of news about Detroit, but we have a lot of people there. We'll put a link in the show notes in case you listen to this podcast before it ends in a couple of days. But we have there's all sorts of our Tanzu pals there going over stuff that you can check out. And you can even, if you want to, you can go, I saw, and request a meeting, which I think, boy, I wonder how that works out. That must be fun to have a page where you have meetings requested, just from like anyone, I guess. But we have several talks there, and I think they already had Backstage Con on Monday, so I'm looking forward to seeing all the recordings. Well, let me be realistic. I'm not going to watch all of the recordings at all, but it's always fun to see. Now I said we were going to cover it next week. But have you all noticed anything coming out of there that's gotten your interest so far? At all? I would have to say I don't know either, but maybe you're faster than me.
I definitely saw something. Yeah, I definitely saw something. Where that's a good point. It could have been Twitter, because everyone's going. So you're getting stuff coming from right, left, and center, but. Some survey, I think, about service meshes and the reasons why people choose them. I think.
Yes.
One thing I saw, but there was something else. Let me come back to me. Maybe I'll think about it and figure out what it was. Maybe I'll have a quick look on Twitter while you're talking.
Well, let me ask you this, Ed. You are a maven of whatever we call this space, the cloud native news. Now, surely, and you followed this stuff long enough, you know that the week before a major conference like this, everyone releases their surveys or their information. So what do you have any highlights from the surveys that were released the week ahead of time to, really like hit the big conference buzz?
I'm not sure I do. I think there were a few weeks earlier. I thought we covered it on one of the last ones. Because I remember we had a whole bunch on service.
I think you're right. The PDF people were faster this year.
Yeah, there were several of them, and I remember saying, this is obviously the KubeCon build-up, etc. So I suspect it's probably one of those, Ben. You might be remembering our own conversations about.
Yes,
I'm pretty sure security came out in those.
And I forget when this came out. I didn't actually check, but we came out with the second instance of our supply chain management open source edition survey, which is a bunch of questions about how larger organizations. I think this year it was 500 or more people, but most of them were like 1,000 or more employee companies. So big enough. And anyways, I someone asked me at some news site to do a little video about it, so I was looking over that, and I don't know, open source usage is at about, I would say, 95%. So pretty cool. And then the funny part is when you ask those 10% of people who aren't using it, which I have a lot of questions for them. But when you ask them, I think it's I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but a significant amount of them say they don't do it because they either haven't come up with a policy yet. So they do want to do it, but they're just putting their policy together, or they haven't shipped their code yet. Right? So it's actually when you there's actually a very low single number percentage who don't use open source, which I'm a little suspicious of, because that also means they don't use Linux, which is sort of I don't know. You probably are using it somewhere in there, but whatever. But
there you go. So I've gone to the records, because this is how we do these things, right? Of our own podcast. And back on the 11th, we did indeed cover. So Sysdig had a threat report, as did Buoyant. And that's probably where those service mesh bits come from. But to be fair to Ben's point, right, it is all over the place. I mean, there's loads of these surveys all the time. There probably has been another one at KubeCon as well, given that there's a service mesh day. And I'm sure, again, security and operations for me, the two things, hence that whole ambient mesh piece that everyone wants it for the security, but also if they can't then use it, it's no good. So making it easier to use and secure are the two things driving it.
But you know what? I did remember what I'd seen. Okay, sorry about that. So I remember what I'd seen. The thing I'd seen was trends. So for day zero, folks are sort of starting to turn up to the conference. People are asking them questions about, what are the things you wanted to see? What are the things you wanted to spend more time thinking about and getting interested in? And two things that stood out for me were supply chains and supply chain security specifically. And the other one was, as part of that, probably related to that, was S-bombs. S-bombs being very top of agenda this year for a lot of folks. And that reminded me that Memonettes Twitter handle we're doing memes of Kubernetes. They had this bingo grid of, you know, things that people will be asking. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out on Twitter. That was very funny as well. Just for a bit of levity, but it involved there was also S-bomb on that chart, which you know, ties in very closely with, I think, what people are saying they're interested in.
Well, I listen to a lot of books nowadays, and I started listening to this one about Achilles of all people. And so now Memonettes, like I was trying to remember which Greek king who was fighting the Trojans is that, and I'm not sure that's one. Well, we'll see if a Kubernetes comes up, King Kubernetes, and you know, Patroknetes probably is the name of his son or something, but we'll find out. Well, you know, speaking of conferences, so in about a week or so. Over a week. Don't worry if anyone's listening. I actually have it in my calendar and my flights are booked. I know when it is. I just don't have it in my mind. But I'm going to be at Explore EU, and I have a talk that I'm looking forward to with some of our friends from Mercedes, Thomas and Roland. Thomas has keynoted at both the CF Summit and Spring One recently. And we have another one of our colleagues, Darren. Somehow we're going to pull off a 4-person talk, but I think we've got it made. I think we'll do it. I've been taking what I call the microservices approach to giving a multi-person talk, which we are very decoupled. We've got little components, and we've minimized the decoupling. We've maximized the decoupling. Anyhow, you know, since I think we have a subsection of our podcast here called "What's Up with Platform Engineering" as a concept, and I think this, as such, I think what we've been trying to do with this talk is, like, Mercedes they've been using the Tanzu application service, a Cloud Foundry based thing, Pivotal Cloud Foundry it used to be called, for like 7 years now. So they have a lot of learnings about what we would call platform engineering now, running a platform, thinking about like the developers as customers. And so it'll be good to hear from them. And then we have another, someone that works for us now, Darren Rice. And I'm sure he would want me to anonymize where he used to work, but it was a large bank, a large global bank. And he similarly ran that team, or actually, I have no idea if he ran the team, but he was involved in some managerial situation with a platform team. So he'll be talking as well. But that will be at Explore, which is the week after next, November something.
Yes, isn't it 7th, 6th or 7th? Yeah.
There you go.
It starts on the Tuesday, a week on Tuesday.
In Barcelona, so you can still go.
Yeah, and I think
out.
4 folks on a talk. That sounds great. Can't you get a ping pong table and do like mixed doubles?
Oh yes, yeah.
You know, maybe do it that way. That would be awesome.
You know, there was the third. Is it the third? No, the second startup I worked at. They were all into foosball and ping pong, and I was just like, the problem. It was a very short-lived startup, but 6 months was long enough.
Ping pong and the football?
Yes. Well, that was the joke. 6 months was long enough for many of my coworkers there to get really good at foosball. Yeah, I don't know if you ever have this effect, but like they got so good that I was just like, no, I'm not going to play with you. Like I am not interested.
Yeah, every visit I ever made to the Pivotal office was like that, with a ping pong table there. I would go in once every 6 months, and it was absolutely creamed. Yeah.
Well, speaking of our platform engineering watch, I think you came across like in our news roundup stuff that we all read, Ed. You found like 6 or 7 sort of things worth highlighting, which I think was good.
I picked out 6 or 7. I think I probably found about 50.
Exactly. There's lots of them, but in particular, there's a working group at the CNCF. What's going on over there?
Yeah, well, I guess it's everything coming round again, I guess. Like, I've got a question for you really related to the fact you've been talking about this for 7 years and why it seems to be coming back round. But I read that and just thought, right, you know, it's a solid thing, right? There's a certain amount of buzz. There's a load of blogs. People like to talk about the buzzwords. But when you get a working group going, then it's a definite thing going forwards, right? Standards take years to form, all that kind of stuff. So I saw that, and actually they've been talking, this working group, since late 2021, I think, and have sort of seen various trends coming, right? GitOps, operators, pipelines, these things they were watching and saying, where do they fit? How can we work with them? And they were originally around app delivery. And they'd sort of been watching and saying, so there's all this stuff that's come up for automating the creation of infrastructure. And there's all this tie-in to applications, but there is a gap between actually making it work together. You could now spin up all your infrastructure automatically, but does that automatically provision with the apps? Is it tied to the apps? All that kind of stuff. And, it's an interesting way of seeing it, because they've been two camps previously, right? Two different teams, all that kind of stuff. And again, it all ties into DevOps, cloud native. So it's interesting that they're now looking at how can you do that. And, they're including Backstage, Crossplane, Dapper, a whole load of things, which are all very much sort of the now, shall we say. So it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of ties together, maybe from a more structured perspective.
Yeah, I'm eager to put it on the pile of things that I really should read, that I'm looking forward to reading, that will not be read in a timely fashion. But no, it was fun, because I was reading through the kind of the post on it, and it looks like they have a good optimistic take on pulling all this stuff together and kind of figuring out what's going on there. And I was thinking, like, and there's some section in it called like Kubernetes for everything. And I was thinking, all right, maybe what we can start calling platform engineering is DevOps for Kubernetes. I think that's what we're talking about here. And I'll see if that sticks and isn't too much of a jerky way of phrasing it, because I'm trying not to be the old man yells at platform engineering type of thing here. I think there's maybe something exciting to do there.
So why do you quickly, this is just me being generally curious, right? And hopefully the audience find it interesting as well, but why do you think it's sort of come around again so much? Given that, you have been talking platform as a product for 7-8 years, it's everything Pivotal did. Why is it coming around again? Is it just because there's so many more tools and that Kubernetes is a new platform, so everyone's discovering it all over again for Kubernetes?
Yeah. I have two theories, and one needs to be informed theory. My first theory is that, so speaking of surveys, well, whatever. I won't back it up with data. There's plenty of charts. I don't know if it's data. There's lots of charts that show that basically, like, Kubernetes is hard for developers to find value in, to use, basically. And so I think, but then also what you see in the surveys is like 3 years ago, operations people were kind of like struggling to stand up Kubernetes and do things with it, right? Because it's hard to install a cloud, basically. And then not only install a cloud, but install like a layer on top of a cloud, whatever. So I think, like, I'm not going to say everyone has that figured out, but that's figured out well enough that, like, it's not as big a deal as it used to be. And then you're like, my funny little story on this is like, all right, so you do all that work and then you have a blinking cursor. That's what you've done. Or as people our age would call it, a dial tone, which I don't think anyone knows what that is anymore, because there is no dial tone. And so, like, so we should stop using that metaphor in tech unless we're talking to veteran IT people. But so then you have a blinking cursor and your developers need to do something. And then you encounter, like, what we see now is, like, Kubernetes is hard for application developers. And so you need, like, a return to the operations people, like, figuring out how to build this stuff up and make it easier for developers. And that naturally flows into, like, whatever platform engineering is. Like, that's a perfect match for that. And then I think the second thing is, like, there's this notion over the past 2 years, 1.5 year, like, cumulative of now. Is that how you phrase that? Including now, from this date, 2 years back.
You know what you mean.
Yeah. Of like internal development platforms with portals. And portal is always an unfortunate word to use nowadays. That is like that's a word for maybe
an intranet.
Yes. And I think that kind of emerged maybe last calendar year as a thing. And I think it might, and then also Backstage emerged as a thing. And then several large companies started using Backstage, which is, documented on the Backstage site somewhere, like American Airlines uses it and all sorts of other people, making these internal development platforms. And so Gartner in February, there's a blog post they had, and they released a paper which we have licensed, and you can find a link to it if you go to tanzutalk.com, writing up IDPs and stuff like that, which is actually, it's a wonderful paper. It's great. Like, all Gartner papers are wonderful, but this one is wonderful in the sense of it's actionable and like detailed and like has screenshots of American Airlines things. So it's interesting and informative, not just like, whatever. There's all sorts of audiences for Gartner material. It's good stuff. So that came out. And then I haven't looked at the funding history of this, but you have like Humanitech, and I forget if Ambassador does this, but there's a couple of startups that have like really good DevRel people and probably really good tech marketing people. And they have just, this is probably a family-friendly podcast, so they have just marketed the crap out of this idea. And then eventually they rolled it into Platform Con, which was in July. And then so if you go look at the people who are in Platform Con, it's all the DevOps crowd. The crowd that's the DevOps, some SRE people, the crowd that's been there. And so it's almost like, that was a comfortable new like umbrella to put things under. And now you're just off to the races, right? So it's kind of a comforting embrace of this new concept. And I mean, this is my totally theoretic thing. My theory is that maybe the notion of internal development portals, or as you say, an intranet, do y'all have this phrase over there? The dog that caught the bus. Like it's one of these things where like I think like a dog's always chasing after a bus and never catches it, and then like when the dog finally catches the bus, the dog's like, oh, what do I do now? Right. So I think like this idea of platform engineering became like a superset of just like internal development portals. And now it's basically DevOps for Kubernetes. And then my third theory is more of a conspiracy one, which is just like, well, I've kind of already mentioned, it's just like a really successful marketing effort, but I don't know. I'm not really sure what it is.
Well, just to clarify, the dog that caught the bus is now how we select our prime ministers. So they were very familiar with it.
Yes.
The dog runs after the bus. I'm on the bus, and then the bus stops, and then the dog goes, "Okay, I caught the bus. Now what?"
Yeah.
I don't know.
Get off the bus.
That's funny.
Leave the bus. Let's leave the bus now. I've spent too long on this bus.
Yeah, and I think I've spent a lot of time in the past month now, like trying to figure out platform engineering. And I think I was just talking with someone yesterday who they're typically a more dismissive person than I am, and they're just like, it's just DevOps, old DevOps is it the phrase new wine in old bottles? Wouldn't you want to put? Yeah, you would want to put new wine in old bottles, right? Because therefore it would seem more expensive. But isn't the phrase like old wine? Whatever. It's just recycled. And this is like the idiom edition of this podcast. But yeah, I mean, I think it is like, I think there's some like value and some rebooting to like kind of subsuming and evolving the DevOps idea. And to your question way back when, in my ramble here. Yeah, I think the platform as a product people are trying to drag all of that notion into platform engineering. And so like, our old pal Paula Kennedy has several talks of that in that community, and, basically introducing product management into your platform stuff. So
and when you said earlier that some folks seem to prefer describing it as DevOps for Kubernetes rather than platform engineering.
Oh, that was just me. I just made up that phrase.
You made it, so you don't use that regularly. It's not.
No. I thought of that like 2 hours ago because I was reading the blog post from the CNCF about their working group, and there's a heading there that says Kubernetes for everything, and part of the other thing, like I was saying in my platform engineering, like Fox Mulder analysis there, is like, like I think it all involves Kubernetes, right? Like I think everyone more or less who talks about it, except for the hand-waving PowerPoint people like me, it's always about Kubernetes at the bottom. And so like, that's therefore, to be jokey about it, it's just like DevOps for Kubernetes.
I see. So
the joke is now explained.
but but the platform as a product thing, and the fact that it's evolved into platform engineering. I mean, are you hearing that folks are really comfortable with that? That folks are very comfortable thinking about platform engineering. They know what it describes. They can understand the personas involved.
I mean, I don't know. I haven't gone out and talked with like a whole bunch of, as you would say, end users, but it feels like the thought lords and ladies and other honorific pronouns I think they're generally cool with it. Like it seems to make sense. And I think I mean, to be a bit gripey, right? Like, I mean, we have lots of white papers and presentations and practices about this type of thing with Cloud Foundry based platforms and other ways of doing things. And it's pretty much the same practices, right? Like if you go back and read, I think our platform as a product white paper was actually revised in like 2021, pretty recently. But if you go back and read it, it's more or less the same thing, just with like less tools talking, right? Like it's more focused on the process or culture, as they say.
Engineering is any platform, right? But actually, I think this current version of it, this sort of the more recent one in a year or so, is, as you said, all Kubernetes. I quite like that, DevOps for Kubernetes, because actually DevOps has been around for forever, SRE's been around forever. But if someone now says to me platform engineering, so I spend my life looking at all these blogs and everything else, I assume they are referring to the more recent, right, you mean doing all of this on a Kubernetes platform, and we're talking internal developer platforms and so on. And that's just that terminology that says, right, we've got a common pot of terminology. It could have been anything 7 years ago, 14 years ago. Platform engineering could have been a generic discipline, but this seems to refer to that set of tools, that part of the industry.
Yeah.
And in that sense, at least it's useful for me. Someone says that, I'm like, right, we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think part of what's palpably changed, particularly over the last sort of 24 months or so, is the level of customization that's now possible in that area. If we are thinking back to previous platforms, they weren't that customizable, right? You couldn't change the supply chain to a huge degree. You sort of got what you got out of the box, and that was it. So the fact that it's more customizable now also gives you more to engineer with. There's more choice to be made, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, is that I mean, I guess it's intentional. It's always hard to know with Kubernetes what's intentional or not, from 6 years ago versus what the deal is now. Just like any technology. But like the intention is to have much more configurability, ironically. Many more options. So that's a good point. Yeah, but back to what you're saying, Ed, like I think, you're well trained as a technologist to always be technologically agnostic about methodologies and theories. And in this case, I think it's one of those where like, sure, you could do like bare metal platform engineering, and you could also like build a car from scratch. Like, or like probably in the majority of cases, like if you were to look at the, whether it's a pie or a donut, like it's mostly going to be one color, and that color is going to be Kubernetes, and there's going to be a few other things there. So it's sort of like, I mean, there's a little crack in the donut up here, but let's just not focus on that. And that's, when I wrote like a, matching my style here, like a lengthy, very unedited newsletter edition where I was consternating about platform engineering. And that was my main suggestion, I think, from there, is just like, you should just call it that this is about Kubernetes and just like move on, right? Because that's going to save you a lot of time. as far as like, it's going to save you a lot of that one slide where you're like, well, it doesn't really matter what technology you're using, and you can do this, that, and the other, but we're going to go ahead and use Kubernetes as the thing that we talk about. Like, I'm sure y'all have read these tech books forever. They're just like, these principles can apply to anything, but we're going to use this exact version of this exact framework from this this exact place to illustrate everything.
It's a natural circuit breaker. It just, it's like, okay, I'm just going to break the circuit here. There's too much flowing in. Let's just do this. Yeah.
Well, I think that's your platform engineering check-in for this episode. Good segment. I think in addition to checking out that blog post, if it's well worth your time to go check out that Gartner piece that we have licensed, because I think it's what I really like about that piece, among other things, but one part that I think is you won't really find is there's a capability breakdown, like the functions of a platform and what they do in there somewhere. And the only thing that comes close to that is like, Charity Majors had that post a couple weeks ago where she has a table, and those are two good artifacts, kind of like listing things out there. But if you go to tanzutalk.com, you can find a link to that. Or just search for like Tanzu Gartner internal development platform paper, and maybe it shows up. Who knows? Well, also, since last time, Google had their big conference, and I forget the exact number, but I think, and I really like this blog post, so I'm not making fun of it, but I think they had 143 cloud-related announcements. Now, 10 or 12 of those were customer references and partnership announcements, which I also appreciated. In fact, I sent a message to one of our people who kind of is involved in that. I was like, ooh, we should do this style for our conferences. I mean, even if it's 143 things, it was one sentence on each, and it was nice. It was a good post. But what were you two most interested in from there? I'll start with you, Ed, since I know you've actually looked over things.
Yeah, so I was, actually enough, I guess, focused on their sort of cloud native side of things, right? I mean, it's always interesting when you watch these big ones, because there was Google Cloud Next, but there was also Microsoft Ignite. And both conferences obviously cover the whole gamut of the cloud, which is just, like you said, a huge amount of stuff. And there's tons of it of which I have absolutely no knowledge. Even though I'm a techie guy, it's, when they get into the depth of either AI or ML, some of the low-code platforms, I don't know them enough to really know what the announcements are about, whether it would matter, how much they are. But certainly for the cloud native stuff, they had some nice intros on Anthos. So kudos to Richard Stroter, who did I thought a really nice demo of how you can use Anthos, and it was the perfect blend of sort of some technology and how it affects the actual business and a use case, and tied together sort of a bunch of their products. Was just very nicely given presentation. I actually liked the whole way that Google Cloud was put together. It was all quite clean. I didn't see any big celebrity endorsement sections, a load of things that are sort of bugbears for me, and it just seemed like quite a nice, here's this thing, it's nicely split up. So their keynotes tended to be, here are 10 things you need to know from 10 different product managers maybe, and each person would give one pitch. I predict, and they made some prediction about what would happen in 5 years, then tied in their products to what Google were doing about that. But it made it really quite easy to absorb things. A bit like you said, they've got a post saying, here's all the things we announced with a sentence each, right? I can scan those, and there's a link to more detail for each one. And incidentally, Microsoft did the same thing. They've done that for a few years. They have a book of news. And if you actually don't catch the conference or you don't have time, you can just go to that one blog post. Everything that gets announced is in one place, and it's got links to dive into everything else. And it's
so nice.
Yeah, because I want to consume all that stuff, and I'm at you. I think I will watch every session. A lot of the time I don't, but I do at least want to scan that list and go, right, which ones do I definitely want to earmark time for and make sure I do watch? Just instead of having to try and trawl 15 different sources or RSS, one post, there it is, job done.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we do a little bit of this here, but like every time I see our internal wrap-ups of things, I always think, oh, we should just publish that. I mean, minus the confidential information that we want to keep to ourselves and the hundreds of people who receive the email. But nonetheless, like it'd be a good newsletter to stitch together a lot of the work that you do, Ed. And then also we have another thing that's like the weekly roundup of all the content we produced, and that would be a hell of an email. But it sure would be useful to have all of that out there.
There is always a lot. But the other thing, they released a new security thing, going back to that service mesh, and this isn't service mesh related. I don't actually have the actual name. Let me see if I can get up the blog post. But it was Software Delivery Shield. There you go. A nice enough name for it, I guess. Which for them is, they've done a good job by the looks of things of stitching together, sort of adding in security at various steps through their software supply chain using various Google Cloud services. So it covers Cloud Run, it covers things like GKE, and it's sort of, the vulnerability assessments, but it will take you through from source code, so it will scan workloads inside Kubernetes clusters and things, but it's got code scanning when you're committing your code. It's got various sort of scanning in different runtimes, like I said, so Cloud Run, or if you're running it in GKE. but just aims to pull it together into a slightly more holistic, do you have confidence in your supply chain? So again, same sort of stuff a lot of people are focusing on. This is their version, I guess, right? If you're all in on Google Cloud, this is probably a great thing to have. It's not going to work for you if you're not all in their cloud, I guess. But again, looked like it was well presented. Hits the spot, I guess, that everyone is focusing on at the minute. Cloud security. So that one, some of the Anthos pieces, sort of some new additions in there. None of them sort of ground shaking. None of them change what it does, but just tweaks and improvements here and there. Those are the sort of things that stood out from that one. And there was some Ignite had a few good ones as well. But anyone else see anything at Google before I move on to the Ignite stuff?
Well, I did take a slightly deeper look at the software delivery shield that you were just talking about, Ed, and it did have some very commendable parts to it. Yeah, it looked really interesting. There was cloud-based IDEs, for example, so no need for sort of a local developer environment or sharing data locally with developers, which is cause for concern for folks like LastPass, for example, who just recently had a developer environment that was compromised. So it sort of helps with the sort of security aspects of some of that, and then the way that it was integrated into supply chain was good. I also like the fact that they'd said they'd looked at the top 250 open source project dependencies and sort of created a curated list of those, and they were going to continually scan them and make sure that they were as free as possible of vulnerabilities. And they'd added a new dashboard to sort of show some of that vulnerability, which is very similar to the security dashboard in Tanzu application platform, I thought. So yeah, it was a nice presentation, that one, and it had quite a lot of good detail on it as well.
Yeah, so I even quite like the naming, to be fair, while we're having a love fest. I just find Software Shield seems to just work in my head as a nice, that's what you're actually trying to do. And yeah, I had something else to mention there that went straight out of my head afterwards when you were talking. I was like, oh yeah, that was a good point. Anyway, we might come back.
Well, then you also mentioned Ignite, Microsoft's conference, and it looks like they are like all of us in this field, trying to figure out like templates or kind of baseline things, sort of like the back to the helping the application developers out, having a starter for various like parts of infrastructure management.
Yeah, so they announced Azure deployment environments, and I haven't played with too much of their sort of previous ones. So they did have something, Azure Dev Test Labs, which kind of was similar in that it was aiming to let you spin up a full environment, right? So create yourself a dev, test, QA, whatever, and try and then keep them in lockstep with the production, and again, all done through code. But it was all still based on VMs, that sort of first iteration. And obviously, a lot of the cloud stuff you can do infrastructure as code, but it still ends up being a bit piecemeal, or you have to write scripts and code to kind of string together, creating all the bits and pieces. So this is them just productizing it a little better and saying, right, this is going to be an aim that will string together neatly, in theory, sort of any Azure service, and let you say, I need one of them, two of them, three of them, put them all together like this, deploy one, deploy two, deploy four. And interestingly, they've also got, what was it, DevBox? I think they talked about that briefly, Ben, which was a bit like, that's what I was going to mention just now when you said it, was the idea of cloud IDEs. So again, a secure kind of, I guess, developer environment with guardrails, so you can predefine it in advance. This is what you can have, this is what you can't have, right, spin one up, job done. And all that, they're now building all this kind of into Azure deployment environments in theory, in the long run. Right now, it only does Azure templates, so ARM templates. But they want to make it flexible so that it can work with Terraform or, presumably whichever languages and frameworks are popular. So you could use those to spin up better development environments. So again, as you said, all targeting at trying to make things easier for developers. They obviously recognize that it's just difficult at the minute. Developers have got this, context overload of having to learn 50,000 things, and they can't do it. You've got to take some away and let them get back to what they're good at.
That reminds me, when I was looking through those 143 things from the Google Cloud stuff, it made me realize, and this probably will always go on, but just how much infrastructure stuff there still is in cloud. Like, we're more or less focused on developers, and so we think about that. But you scroll through there, and it's just like so many things that when I read, I'm like, wow, this is really boring. But like, because I'm an application person, but it's just like networking things, like sizes of compute, and like on and on and on, and like there's still so much of that there for all these people to all the cloud people to evolve, which I don't know. That's kind of fun. It reminded me of the 2000s. Remember on the back of every tech magazine, which is another fun thing, like a dial tone. There was always like every now and then Oracle would have some ad, and it would just be like why we're better, and it would always just be some number next to a big black box. And, I always looked at those and I would just shrug, like, I don't know what's going on here. It's this one goes to 11, I guess, is the story with this. But it's lots of infrastructure stuff scurrying about all the time.
Yeah.
Well,
hardware's been irrelevant for forever and ever, except it still isn't. Someone else builds it for you. It's all done with code, but you still someone somewhere needs to know what it is, and does there need to be more of it, and do you need to hook it up to that?
Yeah. That would be a fun like little 5 to 10 minute pep talk to give to like beleaguered operations people. It should just be like, look, every time something comes out, there's tons of infrastructure stuff. You're still there. Someone's got to figure this out. Like no one, developers aren't going to know how to use that and how it be cost effective. They still need all the old stuff there. Well, as a reminder, we December 6th to 8th, we have Spring One coming up in San Francisco, and I haven't prepared an awesome talk to go over, but I did get a little preview of like what we'll be doing in the keynotes, and there's some fun stuff in there. That's a great, encouraging way of getting people interested, don't you think? There's fun stuff in there.
Are you going to help?
Paying lots of money for that for a bit of fun. Better than your PlayStation, folks.
That's. But there'll be lots of great application development stuff there. A lot of, as we called it in this episode, and is being called platform engineering talk, and then plenty of also just managerial executive case studies. But if you go to spring1.io, I think 100% of the talks are now posted, and you should check that out. And if you want to register, which you should, you can use the code Coté200 to get $200 off. Come check it out. It should be fun.
Folks should be there on the day that they announce Spring Boot 3. Really, I mean, it's going to be a moment, because Spring Boot 3 brings some pretty big changes and improvements and features that people have been asking for years, particularly around native image and how to integrate native image. It's going to be a seminal moment, so you're going to want to be there. You're going to want the T-shirt, right? And there's always a T-shirt somewhere, so you're going to want the T-shirt, I think.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, that's it for this episode. If you want to get the show notes, links to things we mentioned, download that Gartner paper that goes over, as I think we can also rechristen it, developer intranets. You can go to tanzutalk.com and find the show notes for this episode, and click on that and download them and enjoy it. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, that was good. I'll end the broadcast here. Goodbye, people watching the stream.
Bye, anyone who's watching.
Or the video.
Enjoyed yourselves. I'm sorry I didn't look at the chat.